Welcome to this deep dive. We're tackling a truly unsettling case today, really quite disturbing.
Yeah, it's the one at Jefferson County, Colorado,
Hmm,
from April 2023.
that's the one. The rock-throwing murder of 20-year-old Alexa Bartell.
Horrific.
We've got a pretty detailed account here. It outlines the timeline, the investigation, and, the recent legal outcomes for the three young men involved.
Joseph Koenig, Mitch, Karol-Chik, and Zachary Kwak, all teenagers at the time, right?
All 18, yeah. So our goal here is, well, to understand the key events, obviously, but also these very different legal paths they ended up taking.
And maybe try to unpack some of the underlying aspects of this. It's just incredibly tragic.
It really is. It's one of those cases that just sticks with you.
Absolutely. Because of the randomness, I think, and the devastating consequences from what just seems like this extreme disregard for anyone else's safety.
Yeah.
As we go through the details, it's important to look beyond just the facts, maybe consider what might have led to something so horrific.
Okay, so let's start with Alexa Bartell herself. 20 years old, driving home after work, night of April 19th, 2023. This was on Indiana Street near the Rocky Flats area.
Just a normal drive home.
Completely normal, everyday drive. And what's so profoundly sad and frankly terrifying, she had zero connection to these guys.
None at all.
It wasn't targeted. It just feels like this shockingly random act of violence.
And that randomness, that element, it's deeply disturbing, isn't it?
It is.
It just highlights this vulnerability that, feels unsettlingly close to our own lives.
Right.
She was simply going about her routine, and her life just intersected with this senseless violence.
Yeah.
With fatal results.
And tragically, it wasn't just her. This wasn't an isolated event that night.
No, the investigators called it a rock-throwing spree, I believe.
Yeah, across Jefferson County. Apparently, Koenig, Karol-Chik, and Kwak were driving around.
Just targeting cars.
Targeting multiple vehicles with these large landscaping rocks. We're talking at least 7 reported incidents.
Wow. 7.
Yeah. Other drivers got smashed windshields, damage to their cars. Some people were actually injured, too.
So what does that pattern, that spree, tell us?
Well, that's what's fascinating, right? Or maybe disturbing is the better word.
It suggests the fatal incident wasn't just some sudden, isolated impulse.
Exactly. It suggests a deliberate, maybe even escalating series of dangerous choices all evening.
Yeah, it points to this really disturbing lack of consideration for anyone else on the road.
And then comes the moment of just ultimate tragedy. Around 10:45 p.m., Alexa's driving on Indiana Street, and this large rock, reportedly over 9 pounds,
9 pounds. That's substantial.
crashes right through her windshield. The impact killed her instantly.
God, instantly.
Her car veered off the road, and the truly heartbreaking detail, she was on the phone
Oh, no.
with a friend. The friend heard the crash. The line went silent.
Can you imagine?
And then, using location tracking on the phone, guided Alexa's family to the scene.
Oh, that discovery must have been just unimaginable.
The detail about the friend, the family finding her like that, it just brings the immense human cost into such sharp focus, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not just a headline. It's this deeply personal tragedy. Irrevocably impacted that family, the whole community.
So the investigators, they then had this huge challenge, right? Piecing together these attacks that seemed unconnected at first.
Right. How do you link a series of random rock throwings across a county?
Well, the crucial step, it turned out, was connecting the dots. The timing of the incidents, their locations, the geographic spread across Jefferson County, and the consistent method.
These big landscaping rocks being thrown at cars.
Exactly. But how did they make that leap? How did they tie it to specific people?
Well, the real turning point, as it often is these days, was the digital evidence.
Cell phone data.
Cell phone location data played a pivotal role. It placed Koenig, Karol-Chik, and Kwak together.
All 3 of them.
All 3. Together at multiple locations where these rock-throwing incidents happened. And critically,
The exact spot where Alexa Bartell was killed.
precisely, that kind of data, it provides a very strong link, almost, an undeniable connection between the suspects and the various crime scenes.
And they also managed to identify a suspect vehicle, right? Which helped things along.
Yes, that corroborated the digital evidence.
So pretty quickly, within about a week, all 3 young men, Koenig, Karol-Chik, Kwak, all 18, they were arrested.
And the charges were incredibly serious right from the start.
Extremely serious. The big one, obviously, first-degree murder by extreme indifference for Alexa's death.
And multiple counts related to the other victims, too, right? Attempted murder, assault.
Yeah, attempted first-degree murder and assault for the others hit in the spree. Now, this term, extreme indifference, can you explain what that actually means in a legal sense?
Yeah, that's a really crucial point to clarify, because first-degree murder usually makes you think of intent, right?
Right.
Premeditation.
Exactly. Did they intend to kill her specifically?
Well, extreme indifference murder doesn't require the prosecution to prove they specifically intended to kill Alexa Bartell, or any specific person for that matter.
Okay.
Instead, it focuses on their extreme recklessness
Hmm.
and a clear demonstration of indifference to the very high risk of death their actions created for anyone on the road that night.
So it's about their overall state of mind, their disregard for life.
Precisely. It
Yeah.
speaks to a fundamental disregard for human life, even without a specific target. Think of it like firing a gun into a crowded room.
Right. You might not be aiming at anyone in particular.
But your actions show this profound indifference to the likelihood, the very high probability that someone could be killed. That's the essence of extreme indifference murder.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's move forward then through the legal process because things got pretty complicated,
They did. We saw some significant developments, especially recently. And the legal paths for these three, well, they diverged quite considerably.
leading to very different outcomes.
Yes, this is where you really see the complexities. The legal system, individual decisions by the defendants, it all leads to these distinct resolutions.
Okay, so Nicholas Mitch, Karol-Chik, and Zachary Kwak, they both chose to take plea deals. That was back in May 2024.
Right. And as part of those deals, they pleaded guilty to lesser charges than the original ones.
And crucially, they agreed to testify against Joseph Koenig.
That was the key part of the deal, yes.
What's the sort of the typical motivation behind taking a plea deal in a case like this? Is it just about getting a lighter sentence?
Generally, yeah. A plea deal usually involves the defendant pleading guilty, maybe to a lesser charge or just some of the charges, in exchange for something from the prosecution.
Like a reduced sentence recommendation?
Exactly. Or dismissal of other charges, or, like here, an agreement not to pursue the absolute most serious charge, that first-degree murder charge, if the defendant cooperates.
By testifying against the others.
Right. It's strategic for both sides, really.
Mm-hmm.
The prosecution gets that cooperation, maybe avoids a long, uncertain trial. The defendant hopes for a less severe outcome than if they went to trial and lost on everything.
Makes sense. So Koenig didn't take a deal. He went to trial.
He did. That was in April 2025. He maintained his innocence, specifically on the murder charge.
His defense team, they argued he wasn't the one who actually threw the fatal rock, right? Didn't they try to point the finger at Kwak at one point?
Yes, they raised that possibility. They also tried to argue that even if he was involved, his actions were more like manslaughter, not murder. Maybe suggesting it was, impulse rather than that extreme indifference or intent.
Okay, so how did the prosecution counter that defense?
Well, their case relied heavily on all the evidence they'd gathered, the cell phone data placing Koenig there.
Right.
And absolutely crucially, the testimony from his former friends, Karol-Chik and Kwak.
The co-defendants who took the plea deals?
Exactly. Their testimony would have directly contradicted Koenig's claim about not throwing the fatal rock. And it likely detailed the whole evening, reinforcing that element of extreme indifference.
And that's what happened, apparently. Both Karol-Chik and Kwak testified that, yes, it was Koenig who threw the rock that killed Alexa Bartell.
And they added some chilling details, didn't they?
They did. Testified that he celebrated afterwards, which really speaks to that alleged extreme indifference.
Yeah, that's incredibly damning testimony.
So the trial lasted about 10 days, and then late April 2025, the jury came back.
Guilty on all counts.
All 19 counts, including first-degree murder by extreme indifference.
Which, in Colorado, carries a mandatory sentence.
Mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. His formal sentencing is set for June 3rd, 2025. What's the significance of a mandatory life sentence here?
Well, it signifies the absolute gravity with which the legal system views this specific crime, this type of murder. It essentially removes the judge's discretion on the sentence length for that conviction.
So the judge has to impose life without parole.
For that specific conviction, yes. The law dictates the maximum penalty. The jury's verdict of first-degree murder by extreme indifference triggered that mandatory sentence. It reflects their finding that his actions show that profound disregard for human life, leading to this tragic, irreversible loss.
Okay. So Koenig convicted, facing mandatory life. Then the focus shifted to sentencing Karol-Chik and Kwak. the ones who cooperated.
Right. Their plea deals involved pleading guilty to lesser charges, but they still faced significant prison time.
First up was Nicholas Karol-Chik, May 1st, 2025. He'd pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for Alexa's death and attempted first-degree murder for the other incidents in the spree.
And his sentence?
45 years in prison, followed by 8 years of parole.
45 years. That's still a very long time.
It is. And reportedly, at his sentencing, he expressed remorse. He said his desire to, quote, impress his friends played a role.
Wow. That brings up the whole influence of peer dynamics, doesn't it? The group mentality.
Absolutely. His statement, if true, it offers this really troubling glimpse into a potential motive, maybe the motive.
Highlighting that dangerous influence of peer pressure, the need for social acceptance, especially potent at that age, late teens, young adulthood.
Yeah.
This need to fit in or gain approval can sometimes just lead to profoundly poor, and in this case, deadly, decisions.
It makes you really wonder about the group dynamic that night, how individual judgment just got completely warped.
Yeah, how inhibitions might have been lowered in that context.
Yeah.
It's a common factor in youth crime, sadly.
Okay, so then the very next day, May 2nd, Zachary Kwak was sentenced.
What were his specific guilty pleas again?
He'd pleaded guilty to first-degree assault, specifically for the injury to Alexa Bartell.
Okay, so assault, not murder, in his plea for her.
Correct. Plus second-degree assault and attempted second-degree assault for other victims in the spree.
And his sentence?
He got 32 years in prison.
Right.
Which was apparently the maximum allowed under his specific plea agreement, plus 5 years of parole.
So less time than Karol-Chik, but still decades behind bars.
Right. And the judge, according to reports, acknowledged his cooperation.
Which likely influenced the plea deal terms.
But also really emphasized the brutal nature of the crime and mentioned this incredibly disturbing detail about him allegedly taking photos.
Photos?
Of what?
Allegedly photos of Alexa's wrecked car at the scene, after the fact.
Oh, if true, that's deeply disturbing. It suggests such a profound detachment.
Right. A shocking lack of empathy for the victim, for her family, for the whole situation.
It raises really serious questions about, well, his emotional and moral state at the time, and even afterwards.
This whole case just leaves you grappling with that fundamental, unsettling question, why?
The why is always the hardest part in cases like this.
What could possibly drive young people, teenagers, to commit such senseless, violent acts? The idea that boredom or maybe thrill-seeking could escalate to this, it's almost incomprehensible. It really is. Karol-Chik's mention of wanting to impress friends, that hints at the group dynamics, right? Peer influence just taken to an extreme, deadly level.
It makes you think about that line, between youthful impulsivity, which is common, and this utter deadly recklessness.
Exactly. Was it a fundamental lack of understanding the consequences? A significant deficit in empathy, the power of that group mentality clouding individual judgment?
Probably a mix of things.
It's likely a complex combination, yeah.
Yeah.
But Karol-Chik's statement about impressing friends, it does point to that potent role of social dynamics, wanting validation from your peers.
And this case just underscores how quickly those impulsive actions may be fueled by a lack of foresight, lack of empathy, how quickly they can spiral into something irreversible, devastating.
Absolutely devastating.
And the sheer randomness of it all, that just remains terrifying. Alexa Bartell was a victim simply because she was driving home that night, on that road, at that moment.
It starkly highlights how vulnerable we all are, really, to completely unpredictable acts of violence.
Yeah. Her tragic death is just this harsh, heartbreaking reminder of that vulnerability.
She was an innocent person whose life was just abruptly, violently cut short by these callous actions.
It really underscores the fragility of that sense of safety we often take for granted, doesn't it? Just going about our day.
It does. You don't expect a rock through your windshield driving home from work.
Never.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the legal system has, rendered its judgment here. Accountability through convictions, significant prison sentences for all three.
Which is a necessary aspect of justice.
But, as our sources make clear, and as is obvious, no legal outcome can ever truly undo the loss or alleviate the immense pain that Alexa Bartell's family now endures.
They face their own life sentence, really, a life sentence of grief.
Exactly. That legal accountability, it's necessary, but we have to remember it cannot erase the impact on Alexa's family, her friends. Their loss is immeasurable. It will always be felt. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really leaves you contemplating these complex issues, doesn't it? Accountability for young offenders when they commit such extreme acts of recklessness.
How do we reconcile their youth with the permanent devastating consequences of what they did.
Yeah. And how do we grapple with that inherent fragility of our everyday safety, knowing that such random violence can and does occur?
Heavy questions with no easy answers.
No easy answers at all. And it's worth noting, Joseph Koenig's formal sentencing is still pending June 3rd. And of course, all convictions remain subject to potential appeals down the line.
The legal process may not be entirely over yet.
Exactly. Something to keep in mind.